I'm Laura Trevelyan in Washington, D.C., and this is BBC World News America. Political drama in Brazil as an inquiry calls for President Bolsonaro to face criminal charges over his handling of the pandemic. Now the Senate is deciding how to handle the explosive report. Australia is the latest country with a plan for net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Activists say it's a scam, but the Prime Minister is holding firm.
Australians want action on climate change. They're taking action on climate change.
In Sudan, the coup leader says the army seized power to prevent a civil war as protests against the coup continue. Plus, we report from Lebanon, where people who can afford to leave are fleeing as the chaos which is crippling the country intensifies. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. These are turbulent times in Brazil, where an inquiry by lawmakers has found that President Bolsonaro should face criminal charges over his handling of the pandemic. Today, the country's Senate spent the day debating what to do with the inquiry's report. Brazil has the second highest death toll in the world from COVID after the United States. But President Bolsonaro says he's not guilty of any crimes. Let's go to our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, who's in Brasilia. And Katie, could President Bolsonaro actually face criminal charges here?
I think this is a beginning of a long process. Once the vote is passed, then it has to be passed over to the federal prosecutor, who will make up his mind whether there's enough evidence to be able to charge the president, as well as many other people who've been named in the report. But let's just have a look at what's been going on here in Brasilia these last few days.
Primeiro indiciado, Jair Messias Bolsonaro.
Today marks the end of a long process. 6 months of hearings, scandals uncovered, a light shone on a government accused of recklessness. And now a vote to recommend charging the man at the top with a very long list of crimes. But this is a vote that splits senators. Those in favour of Bolsonaro claim the inquiry is a political witch hunt.
I vote for the rejection of the report. No concrete evidence was found of illegal acts and omissions practiced by authorities and employees of the Federal Public Administration in the handling of the pandemic.
The commotion in the Senate today is far removed from the city's poorer neighbourhoods. But here, they're wanting to make a noise too. Max is a community leader and aspiring politician. He runs music and dance workshops for young people. Culture, he says, gives them the chance to talk politics and change their futures.
This Congress is debating with itself in a language that does not reflect the real Brazil, the real Brasilia of the working people who wake up early, get on a crowded bus, eat in the bakery, struggle to pay the bills and live in a difficult neighbourhood.
22-year-old Yanka says the workshops have given her opportunities and a voice. The government, on the other hand, she says, tries to silence people like her.
He has made life more difficult than you could ever imagine. I think he's inhumane. What he's doing is inhumane. Lots of things he does amount to crimes. There are people in the suburbs going hungry, having to rob food, and this man just spreads fake news and campaigns against the vaccine. It's absurd.
Fake news, denialism, corruption and more. These are the accusations that Jair Bolsonaro faces. But will he have to stand up in court to defend his actions? Few people here think justice will be done.
Katie Watson is still with us. So, Katie, how is all of this affecting President Bolsonaro's approval ratings and his standing?
Well, there's no question, whichever side of politics you're on here in Brazil, that this inquiry has dented his popularity. A lot of people are asking what that means for the coming year. It's a year until the next presidential elections. He's not confirmed whether he's running or not, but certainly it'll be a bigger challenge. You've had the pandemic, the inquiry. All of these just make his life more difficult if he does want to run for re-election. But a year is an awfully long time in Brazilian politics. A lot could change, certainly between now and then.
And Katie, what is the situation with the coronavirus vaccine rollout in Brazil? Last time I laid eyes on President Bolsonaro in New York City, he was proudly unvaccinated.
Well, this has been one of the big criticisms that's come out in the inquiry, that there were delays to the vaccine rollout, and as a result that caused more deaths than there needed to have been. And that's been, a huge criticism here. I mean, at the same time, it really depends on where you are in the country. In fact, it was announced that in Sao Paulo, the biggest state, and you might remember that was where there was a lot of controversy over the governor, João Doria, who was really pushing for vaccination, and he kind of came to blows with the president. There, 100% of adults have had their first dose of the vaccine. So the rollout was slow. It has, now picked up, but certainly it's behind other parts of the world still.
Katie Watson in Brasilia, thank you. Now to Australia, one of the world's biggest polluters, which has pledged net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The country's Prime Minister said the plan wouldn't mean the end of fossil fuels, though. The announcement took months of political wrangling and comes days before the crucial UN summit on climate change in Glasgow. The BBC's Azadeh Mashiri reports.
Wow. Australia is no stranger to the ravages of climate change and extreme weather, having witnessed devastating wildfires ripping through the country and torrential downpours flooding its coasts. Images like these are why the Global Climate Summit, COP26, is pushing for countries to set ambitious emissions targets. And now, just days before the summit, Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has pledged to get to net zero emissions by 2050. But there are caveats and few details.
Australians want action on climate change. They're taking action on climate change. But they also want to protect their jobs and their livelihoods. They also want to keep the cost of living down. And they also want to protect the Australian way of life.
Australia is one of the leading suppliers of fossil fuels and exported $40 billion worth of coal in 2020. Now, Prime Minister Morrison has announced more than $15 billion in low emissions technologies over the next 20 years. But he said the plan will not set targets for 2030 that the summit is pushing for, nor limit the use of fossil fuels. The pledge has drawn criticism, with some arguing it's too light on details.
Unfortunately, the Morrison government has today announced an embarrassingly hollow plan for net zero emissions by 2050 with absolutely no credibility and no actions or new policies to actually support their new claim. It's predicated on unspecified technology breakthroughs. It relies on international offsets with no budget implications. It claims credit for actions that our state government policies have put in place and which the federal government's been actively undermining now for 8 years in a row.
So while Australia has offered a plan to get to net zero, there are still questions as to how it will work and whether it's even enough. Azadeh Mashiri, BBC News.
We have news tonight on the Queen, who was supposed to attend the upcoming climate conference in Scotland. Buckingham Palace say she won't be going on the advice of her doctors. The 95-year-old monarch cancelled a trip to Northern Ireland last week. For the latest, let's go to Helena Wilkinson at Windsor Castle. And Helena, what can you tell us about the Queen's condition tonight?
Well, we understand that the Queen is resting here at Windsor Castle. We also understand in the coming days she will carry out and continue to carry out those lighter duties that she has been doing since she was discharged from hospital last Thursday. But we had that statement from Buckingham Palace earlier on this evening, confirming that the Queen is not going to attend the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow in person. She had been due to travel there for an evening reception on Monday to meet delegates there, global leaders. That is now not going to happen. And the Palace, in their statement, has said that the Queen has regretfully decided to not travel after the advice that she has been given by doctors to continue resting. She also, we understand, is disappointed that she won't be going to the climate summit. She is a queen who likes to be seen, who likes to be out in public, meeting people, committed to her duty, but she is now not going to be going to the summit. And I don't think it's a real surprise, really, given the fact, and we keep saying this, she is 95 years old. She had to cancel a trip to Northern Ireland last week and also had to stay in hospital overnight. It was her first stay in a medical facility for 8 years. And so she is here this evening. She will continue resting, but she will continue to carry out those lighter duties in the coming days.
Helena Wilkinson at Windsor Castle for us tonight with the latest on the condition of the 95-year-old monarch. Well, following the military coup in Sudan, the United States has suspended a $700 million aid package to the country. Protests are continuing for a second day after a violent crackdown on Monday by the military that killed at least 7 people. Sudan's coup leader says the military seized power to prevent a civil war. David Campanale has more.
Chanting and rallying behind burning tyres, they've blocked roads in the capital Khartoum and around the country following the takeover. On Monday, the military coup leaders dissolved civilian rule, arrested political leaders and called a state of emergency. But the people whose actions triggered the end of Sudan's military dictatorship remained defiant.
Sudan's current situation is awful, but we will not accept any military coup in this country. That's enough. 30 years of al-Bashir's humiliation. We don't want another coup now. We want an elected civilian government.
Soldiers have used lethal force on the crowds, and there are reports of deaths and many injured. The military coup has drawn global condemnation. Diplomats will meet at the UN Security Council to discuss the crisis and have urged maximum restraint.
I'm calling on the military to release all those that were unlawfully detained today, and I'm asking all stakeholders to return to dialogue and restore the constitutional order, as well as not to put domestic peace and political transition at risk.
Troops are reported to have been going house to house in Khartoum, arresting local protest organisers. Speaking to the nation, General Abdel Fattah Burhan sought to justify the takeover by blaming political infighting. The city's airport is closed and international flights are suspended. The internet and most phone lines are also down. Central bank staff have reportedly gone on strike, and across the country, doctors are said to be refusing to work in military-run hospitals except in emergencies. David Campanale, BBC News.
In other news now, an advisory committee to the US Food and Drug Administration has recommended the use of Pfizer's COVID vaccine in children aged 5 to 11, saying the benefits outweigh the risks. The decision brings the vaccine a step closer to about 28 million kids in America. Shots could be offered as early as next week, should the FDA and then the Centers for Disease Control accept this recommendation. The Ethiopian Air Force has carried out a new round of bombing in Mekelle, the main city of the northern Tigray region. Government officials said the offensive targeted a rebel training camp. Rebel forces accuse the government of targeting and killing civilians in the air raids because it's losing ground battles. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. The BBC sits down with Sir David Attenborough. He warns leaders in the developed world, act on climate change now or it'll be too late. The US federal agency has revoked China Telecom's licence to operate in the country. It comes hours after the US Treasury Secretary spoke to the Chinese Vice Premier. Here's Michelle Fleury.
One of the things that came up in that conversation between the Chinese Vice Premier Liu He and US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was yet here we are, you've got an American telecoms regulator voting to revoke the licence for Chinese telecoms in America. In other words, this company now has 60 days to cease its operations or else. And I think that underscores the challenge going forward. But when you've got this sort of noise going on in the background and the ongoing treatment of the Chinese company Huawei, I think it makes these conversations increasingly difficult. They know they are the world's two superpowers and the fate of the global economy is important. The question is, how much progress can they make with this noise going on around?
We turn to Lebanon now, where violent clashes in Beirut a few weeks ago led to fears of renewed civil strife. The country is in the grip of an economic and political crisis, while still dealing with the aftermath of that devastating port blast in 2020. As Lebanon's descent into chaos accelerates, educated professionals are fleeing the country. In his latest report from Beirut, Mark Urban looks at the impact of the brain drain.
Each day, Joe Tatul does the rounds, delivering meals to those who are faltering amid the punishing realities of life in Lebanon. They used to focus on the old. Now there are many professional people too, made destitute by disaster and economic crisis. Here, a woman who can't afford to rent anymore has moved back in with her mother. Many salaries have been crushed by rampant inflation. And this charity delivers food and medicine, and the numbers needing that help have soared in the past 2 years.
Actually, we had about 100 people, and today we're close to 600. But of course, some people leave, some stay. But we could go up to 800 or 900 people that our kitchen could cater for. 1,500, but financially we have a limit. That wouldn't allow us to go on for more than 3 months like that.
The Syrian refugee children who sell flowers on the Corniche find few takers these days. The UN said recently 74% of Lebanon's population now lives in poverty. Many affluent neighbourhoods are emptying out.
One neighbour here and one neighbour. They left.
Lina Nakuz lives in Ashrafia. Most of the nearby residents have gone abroad. Having lost her husband.
Since the blast, everything worsened. Every day is worse than the day before. I was told my apartment was gone, this one. After I lost my job, I couldn't find a new job. Money is still stuck in the bank. So everything is pushing us out. And people that don't go out, that means they don't have the possibility.
It was supporting her daughter Maria's pre-medical studies that kept Lina here. But now Maria is telling her mother to leave Beirut.
It's a quite tough decision because I wanted to stay here, to stay with my family, to feel like I'm in my home. It's my home here. I don't want to leave.
The cataclysmic port explosion of August 2020 came at a terrible time for a country already marred in COVID and economic crisis. Among the consequences, a near-complete breakdown in power supply, leading wheeler dealers to wire up neighbourhoods and sell them generator power. The Lebanese are nothing if not resourceful. When a local generator operator goes bust, someone else steps in and new wires go up. There are so many different power struggles going on here now that some fear open conflict could soon be added to the country's list of woes.
I cannot imagine what also we have like a problem. It's no health, no food, no gas, no electricity, no hope. No hope because you know what happened in Ain Romania. I can feel it. I'm used to war. I can feel it. It's war.
The reality of Beirut's present mess shows itself at nightfall. Wandering around here at night is really quite eerie. There's no street lighting, of course, because of the power situation, but very few of the flats are occupied. It's a wealthy part of the city, and one has to presume that the professionals and other well-off people who live here have gone. Now, there's shame involved in doing that, and there's no statistics. The government probably wouldn't want to share them, even if they had them. But you really get the feeling, to a considerable extent, of a society that's gone into hibernation. So Beirutis while away the nights and wonder about their own staying power. It's a remarkably resilient city, but everyone has their limits.
Mark Urban reporting there on how hope is running out in Lebanon. Now, the broadcaster Sir David Attenborough has called on the world's richest nations to help the most vulnerable survive the effects of climate change. The 95-year-old environmentalist spoke to our science editor, David Shukman, during the filming of a new documentary series, The Green Planet.
Action, David! If you get up and walk away as if you were going back to that tree.
A trusted figure, recognised globally, Sir David Attenborough will play a key role at the COP26 Climate Summit. And ahead of the event, we caught up with him at Kew Gardens, filming his new series, The Green Planet, to air next year.
This is a battlefield. Its tendrils are highly sensitive to touch.
Programmes use high-tech cameras to reveal the battles in the undergrowth.
Got it.
Well, they're all old friends, aren't they? That's the nice thing.
And he told me with his usual enthusiasm about the results.
You can build up a sequence into a real drama, so you really feel that that particular plant is hell-bent on strangling some other plant, which they often are, of course.
The Attenborough message is that plants aren't just fascinating to look at, they're essential for tackling climate change. And he says that time is now running out for the richest countries in particular to take action.
It would be really catastrophic if the developed nations of the world, the more powerful nations of the world, simply ignored these problems. Do we say, oh, it's nothing to do with us and cross our arms? We caused it. Our kind of industrialization is one of the major factors in producing this change in climate. We have a moral responsibility. Even if we didn't cause it, we would have a moral responsibility to do something about thousands of men, women and children who have lost everything. Can we just goodbye and say it was no business of ours? You have to believe there's still things to be done about it. And I believe there are. The question is, on a world scale, when is it too late? But it's difficult to see. If we don't act now, it will be too late. And action, David.
I watched you filming almost non-stop for 5 hours this morning. You're 95. It's an incredibly impressive sight. What are you planning next?
Well, I don't plan very far ahead. As you say, I'm 95. How long can you go on? It isn't within our gift to say those things or to know those things. All I know is that if I get up tomorrow and I feel that I'm able to do a decent day's work, then I should jolly well do it.
And with the talks in Glasgow starting next week, he clearly feels a sense of duty to keep pressing global leaders to put the world on a safer course. David Shukman, BBC News.
David Attenborough, aged 95. And before we go tonight, we leave you with a royal wedding in Japan which had no fanfare at all. And actually, no royals. Princess Mako, the niece of Japan's emperor, has married a commoner, Kei Komuro, at a simple ceremony, and she's had to give up her title to be with him. After the couple announced their engagement 4 years ago, Princess Mako's father withheld his approval of the marriage, turning public opinion against the couple. His daughter suffered mental anguish. Today, though, the groom declared he wants to spend his one life with the person he loves. Newlyweds are likely to live together in New York City, happily as commoners, not as royals. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thank you so much for watching BBC World News America. Have a great evening.